Hello, everyone, and welcome to American Civil War and UK History. I'm Daz. This presentation is available as a video or on our YouTube channel, and also as a podcast from wherever you get your podcasts from. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and I'm also part of the Unfiltered Historian team. You'll find all the relevant links in the description below. Today, I would like to welcome author, historian, and editor Iain MacGregor. Welcome, Iain.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Iain has worked in non-fiction publishing for almost 3 decades, working for a very well-known publishing company called Osprey. So today we are going to discuss his latest book called U.S. Civil War Battle by Battle. And just going to get my share screen up. There we go. Okay. Also, Iain has had his hand in editing many other books on the US Civil War, as well as writing a couple of books on other time periods in history, which we will discuss a little bit later on. So firstly, Iain, please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the publishing business and where your love for military history, American Civil War, and of course, the opportunity that come up for you to actually work for Osprey.
Wow. I'll have a lightning dash through my life. But yeah, so, well, basically, I've always loved history since I was a little kid. Like a lot of your listeners will be the same. It's just some people like science, some people like gardening. I love military history. I love history in general. And I suppose the military angle comes from the fact that I come from a military family. So I'm the first generation of MacGregor's. Much to my father's shame at the time, that didn't go into the armed forces. So my dad was in the army, he was in Korea, and then both my grandfathers were in the army, and my dad's dad was an RSM in the Black Watch, career soldier, and then I've got uncles, great uncles, all that kind of stuff. So I kind of grew up with it, and it kind of seeped into me and what I like to read, and then kind of wanted to do history for O-level. Obviously did my history O-level, did my history A-level, my degrees in history, and I specialized in modern European history because I found that really exciting and interesting, because obviously it's on my doorstep. And even though it was the Cold War in the 80s when I was doing my A-levels, I managed to go on a student exchange to Russia back in 1981, and that led to the book I'm writing right this minute, which publishes this year as well. And then, like I said, went to uni, did my degree, and then skipping to publishing, because I'll talk about why I love the American Civil War and things I've seen and stuff in other questions. But it's basically I did a master's degree in publishing studies, and back in the old days, so almost 3 decades ago, there was only a couple of courses that did this, and so they had a direct entry into the business, primarily in London, and you were always guaranteed to do work experience or work placements, internships with good publishing companies. So I was really lucky, and within 6 weeks of doing an internship for a London company, it was a big global company, but one of the imprints, or one of the companies this company owned that was in the building, happened to be Osprey Publishing. And for a kid who'd grown up already with a lot of Osprey books on his shelf, I couldn't believe it. And I did some internship with them for a couple of weeks, and then it was just luck. They had an editorial assistant position come up, and I was offered it. I couldn't believe it. I was pinching myself, thinking, "Wow, this is amazing." And I was there for a good few years. I was there for nearly 8 years, and progressed through the ranks to where I went. Like I said, I was assistant editor, which means you were the gopher. You did everything: photocopying, making coffee, notes at meetings, all that kind of stuff. Then to editor, where I was actually editing the books. And as, again, your listeners will know, Osprey do a range of series within. So you got the campaign series, Men at Arms series, Warrior, Elite, that kind of thing. And so I was editing some of those books, and it's the normal way in publishing. It's the way in any job. You get more experience, you want to go, I suppose, higher. So the very first book I ever commissioned was a Warrior title, and it was on the Napoleonic Imperial Guardsman. I've still got it on my shelf, even though it's about 25 years old. So that was my first book. But from a Civil War experience, I'd always read about it, always was interested in it. And again, it was almost mind-blowing in the fact that once I started working at Osprey, I mean, it's just all these titles. I mean, dozens of them, dozens and dozens, in all shapes and forms, on all subjects to do with the American Civil War, and written by some brilliant authors. And as you were saying earlier, some of the illustrations that Osprey obviously has got a huge reputation in and specializes in. That's what makes it, brings it alive, brings it off the page. And so, yeah, I mean, excuse my language, but I was like a pig in shit, basically. So it was a boy's own dream, really. And sad day when I left. I was there for nearly 8 years, and then I just moved on because I wanted to do other things.
Yeah, cool. But yeah, it's really cool. And so have you actually traced back your family's military history and lineage in that?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, it's a long line. I mean, we got as far back as the Crimea. So one of my ancestors.
That's pretty cool, because that's got some bearing on the American Civil War in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so there was definitely one of my ancestors in Crimea, and in the infantry in a Highland regiment. And then I've got another, gosh, great. I'd be making it up if I told you how many greats, but it's in the Victorian area. I got he was a captain in the Royal Artillery. My grandfather, who was an RSM, he was the youngest of 4 brothers, and the other 3 were old enough to all have fought in the Great War, and they all did. 2 of them were killed, and I've got all their medals downstairs. They're all up on the wall, because I think they, you're probably the same. I think things like that should be remembered properly. And I've even got one of those old dead man, the dead man's penny. If your close relative was killed in the Great War, the government gave you one of these big brass pennies that were made from spent shell casings, I think they were made. So I've got one of those lined up. And then, yeah, I've got great uncles that were in. I've got one great uncle who was at Kahima. I've got another great uncle. I'm looking at his medals here. It's above my laptop. He was at Monte Cassino, mentioned in dispatches. And then, like I said, my dad was at in Korea. Then he was in the peacekeeping forces in Korea. Another uncle was in Cyprus with the UN. So yeah, it's so when I said, "Oh, I'm not going in the armed forces," it was a bit of a stir, but they got over it. As soon as they knew I was working for Osprey.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. What do you mean publishing? Yeah. Anyway, so
Yeah.
Let's talk about your new book that's coming out, or has come out. It came out on Wednesday, I believe, or was it Thursday? Sorry, Thursday.
Thursday, yeah.
Firstly, what inspired you to actually write this book about the Civil War, American Civil War?
Well, I was going to say that. I mean, that's even pre me joining Osprey days. I mean, right the way through from when I remember the very first thing I read about the American Civil War. I was 9 years old, and my mum and dad got me an illustrated book on military history, The Great Generals, and it was like, big picture book, but it had a lot of text in as well. I mean, it's, I'd say it's probably about maybe O-level standard of text, maybe in the description and the analysis and the facts and figures that it gave you. But two of the generals that they had in this book, I mean, it went all the way from, say, Roman times all the way through to the Second World War. And it had 2 generals in there of the American Civil War. And obviously one of them was Robert E. Lee. And the famous battle that they isolated in the book, so I'm a 9-year-old on holiday reading about this, was Gettysburg. And so from 9 years old, I was just captivated by, because that was the first time anyone had really told me, because obviously I'm not in the American educational system, that there was a civil war in America in the 19th century. And so from then on in, I kind of did lap it up as much as I could, to, like I said, to the point where after I finished my degree, didn't really know what I was going to do. And this is before I did my master's degree in publishing studies. So I did what a lot of students do. And I went to America and did Camp America. And I was up right in the top of Pennsylvania. But after I finished there for the summer, because I had probably about 4 or 5 weeks left before I had to go home, I did a few tours of the main battlefields. So obviously I went to Gettysburg, got as far down as Fredericksburg, and I went to those, and it was amazing. It was fascinating. And obviously, as a lot of your guys again know, it just brings it all alive, and you get the scale of the thing, and you get, I suppose, Americans are so brilliant in their national parks and in their battlefield sites of preserving and not building over what's gone on in these iconic conflicts. So again, I just loved it. And so that's what I mean. When I got to the Osprey job and I found all this, it was just incredible. So skipping forward to now, and I wrote this book in lockdown, is basically, I even though I left Osprey, we're a bit of a fraternity. All the old guys from my day, like I said, towards the end of the 90s, we're all still in contact. Most of them, definitely half of them, are still working in one way or another for Osprey, either as freelance editors or even authors. Excuse me. And so, and I've always bought the books. I've got shelves of Osprey books behind me. And so a good friend of mine, Marcus Cowper, is now the publisher of Osprey, and he'd liked a book I'd written already. So like I said, I generally write about European history as an author. So my previous book that came out 2.5, nearly 3 years ago, was on a history of the Berlin Wall and a history of the Cold War. And Marcus really liked that. And he's always wanted to try and get me on the list. And I was saying, well, yeah, but I don't really want to write a men-at-arms book or a warrior book on the Cold War, because quite a few of them have been done already and they've been done really well. Be great if we could do something. He said, well, yeah, but there must surely be another subject that you're interested in. And being straight away, put my hand up and said, well, if I'm going to write anything, I would love to do a book on the American Civil War. I mean, it's outside of European, a small area of European history. After the Second World War, I said that's my go-to. I've got all the Osprey books. I've read lots of other books on the Civil War. I've read Grant's autobiography, all that kind of stuff. And he said, yeah, okay. And he said, would you be interested in one of these? And this is a series that they've just started to develop. So this is one of a series of books. This book we're looking at now, the previous book they'd done was on battles of World War II. And so the template for the book has already been set. So they're really keen, because they're saying, well, obviously for them, for Osprey, the American Civil War is huge for them. And you can tell by, if you look at their backlist, like I said, dozens and dozens and dozens of titles and across all the ranges. So I was very happy to do that. And honestly, it was a pleasure. I mean, it made the lockdown a lot easier by thinking, well, this is fantastic. I just get to pick 30 of my top battles. And to be fair, it let me do a lot of research on what I'd like to offer the reader as well. Because at the end of the day, this kind of book, as you can see, it's a small book. It's a booklet almost, but you've got to try and capture the essence of a battle within the conflict itself, and talk about the personalities. You might want to talk about tactics. You might want to talk about weaponry, flags, logistics, all that kind of thing. So what I was trying to capture is, I had a big spreadsheet saying, okay, if I talk about various battles, I can talk about east to west, I can talk about the great generals, I can talk about the chronology as the war progressed, innovations in technology, innovations in transportation, how that affected battles and everything else. And so, yeah, it was just, that's how it came about. It just came about from a conversation in lockdown that I grabbed with both hands, and it was fantastic to do.
Cool. And so can I just ask as well, obviously, because you're obviously in the UK, so, you know, when it comes to doing non-fiction books, what sort of resources is available to you when obviously putting a book like this together? You know, because again, like I said, you know, being in the UK, although you've got books you can read, when you're actually standing on the ground, it's a little bit, I find, you know.
Yeah, well, obviously for only a handful of the battles that are in this book, I've been to the sites, and I do remember some of the topography. I do remember what I saw. I do remember the weather, because it was summertime, and obviously that's the key time for summer campaigning in the American Civil War. Obviously on the Eastern Theatre, that's where I was. But then, yeah, I mean, well, I mean, my degree is I'm a trained historian, and I work with some of the biggest historians in the UK. I mean, I've published Simon Sharma, Max Hastings, people like that. In the USA, I published William Taubman, who's probably one of the experts on East European history. So I know what it takes and what you should do. And obviously, like I said, I've got lots and lots and lots of backlist Osprey books on my shelf. And, I just grabbed a few off the shelf. Here's Shiloh. But what I didn't want to do, and what you probably can appreciate, is I wouldn't want to read those books because they'll sink into my subconscious and then I'll just be parroting what somebody else said. So what I try and do is, like I said, just in my last question, or my last answer, I should say, is I wanted to approach each battle. I wanted to give the reader a different perspective in only, it's bite-sized because, like I said, it's a booklet. So it's 750 to 1,000 words per battle. But I just don't want to give a very kind of shortened, fast-paced run through a battle, because it gets very repetitious and it would get a little bit boring, and people would probably think, well, I could get this on the internet, which is what I didn't want. So what I wanted, like I said, what I wanted to try and do was give little bits of different angles for every battle that just gave it a new element to what someone who didn't know much about the American Civil War, if they pick this book up, they'll find something really interesting to talk about. So why was North against South at the beginning? Why is Fort Sumter so pivotal to the start of the American Civil War? Why was, for instance, what made Grant such an amazing general? What made Lee such an amazing general? Why was the loss of Jackson so pivotal to Lee at Gettysburg? And it's those kind of things. That's the kind of things I talk about in the book. Is try and not be dry and obviously be opinionated as well. So if someone's made I'm not a great fan of Hood at Nashville. I think that's one of the battles that didn't need to be fought, but I chose it because I thought I wanted to talk about that.
Mm-hmm. And again, this is sort of like you're saying, this is sort of book that someone's going to pick up, and hopefully, if they've never been interested in the American Civil War, it gets them into the American Civil War. So yeah, that's what I get from it as well. It's great.
Yeah, and it also and key, because you and I were talking about it beforehand, it showcases just what amazing artwork the Osprey books have, because obviously it's my original text and my opinions in the text, but again, I'm lucky because I was just picking books off the shelf and thinking, well, if we're going to talk about Gettysburg, we've got to have this image from Richard Hook in there, because it's just incredible. And again, I'm such a fan of many of the artists that have decorated
that's what I was going to say anyway. I was going to say that one thing I've always loved about Osprey is obviously the illustrations, and I mean I've got a few examples here from the book. You've got the Bull Run, first Bull Run by Peter Dennis. So you've got
fantastic.
The Soldier there by Richard Hook. Also, you've got one of my favourite generals, and I get a lot of stick for this, is General Burnside. I like Burnside. I think gets a lot of flack, poor guy. But there you go, that's me.
I agree with you. I mean, I completely agree with you. I think Fredericksburg was a disaster. But I mean, we could have a separate.
I mean, I have this discussion with my friend Tyler in Fredericksburg, and this is how we connected, me and Tyler, is the fact. Right. We've got this same opinion on Burnside, that Henry Halleck's basically stitched him up,
Yes. I'd go along with that. Well, he was stitched up at Antietam as well.
Yes, of course. And again, you've got this great picture of the cornfield. And the reason I chose these two actually is because obviously my recent trip to the States, I actually went to Antietam for the first time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the corn was cut down by this stage because it was December. But
right.
I chose the bloody angle because I've also been I got taken on a really good tour of Spotsylvania, and that's why I chose those particular.
Yeah.
But they're just amazing, I mean, the level of detail that the illustrators put into these pictures is just amazing.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I can talk you through how we do this. I mean,
yes, please.
Half the job, when you're an editor at Osprey, half the job is getting all the references. You work with the author and you cross-refer and triple-check the references the authors have to supply to the artists to get these things right, because as you can sympathize with, it's not about capturing the artists can easily, as you see in these images, they can capture the ferocity of any battle. Could be medieval, could be Pavia in Italy, could be Normandy 44, or it could be the cornfield at Antietam. But the things you have to get right, and the things that the Osprey editor is there for, is to double check the references that go on in terms of uniform, in terms of the weapons they're carrying, in terms of insignia, all those kind of things you have to check before they go to the artist, so they have all the tools necessary that they can then produce these kind of artworks. And sometimes you get Osprey authors who aren't used to the level of detail that's required, and that, again, that's where the editor comes in. We would just supply extra material. Like I said, half my job, half my hours in the office used to be getting more books and giving more material, giving more color photocopies, giving lots of photographs of maybe the bloody angle, different photographs of how it looks today, all that kind of stuff. So that used to be a lot of the behind the scenes work we do to get them looking this good.
Yeah, so they are amazing. They really are. So also, you've said, you've edited various other books on the U.S. Civil War,
Yeah.
including Shiloh, Chancellorsville, Fredericksburg, and Gettysburg. And again, obviously, did your trip help with editing those as well?
Yeah, because you want to make sure, like we were talking about before, the major moments that can be connected to the landscape and the conditions are key. And you don't have to have gone to them. It's just it helped me because when you're looking across the river at Fredericksburg and you're thinking, they built a pontoon, under fire, and then they had to make their way through the town. It's just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm of the opinion that if you don't stand on the ground, you'll never actually understand the battle. And
yeah, true.
I mean, standing at Antietam for the first time was just eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
I always imagined it to be huge. And when because I stood where the batteries are, and so it's just to the left is the church, which the name of it escaped my mind all of a sudden. That's the one. And it's so, actually it's quite small when you're standing there on the ground, but I imagined it'd be huge, but yeah, unless you actually stand on the ground, I don't think you'll ever understand the battle properly. Again, you don't have to stand on the ground.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you're standing in the center of Gettysburg and you're looking across to where Pickett came with his divisions, and it wasn't a boiling hot day when I was there. It was overcast, but you're looking at it, you thinking that is a hell of a long way to be marching in formation against this position, and you just you admire it, but you just think, what a crazy order that was. And hindsight's a great thing, but then it's like charge the light brigade at Balaclava. It's just one of those things you just think that should never have been done. But yeah, it gave me an appreciation. But I mean, I won't show the listeners, but yeah, I mean, I did Shiloh, Chancellorsville, Fredericksburg, Gettysburg, obviously. Nashville is a great. It's one of my favorites, I would say. Such a brilliant battle, but an unnecessary battle. But it's just it encapsulates just the I think the outdated tactics that were used to deliver firepower against entrenched positions, where, as everyone knows, like we saw at Gettysburg and Fredericksburg, they just get annihilated, blown away when you're trying to march up to these positions that are almost impregnable. And Nashville's a bit like that too. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the Civil War, the U.S. Civil War book. But you have, like you've mentioned, you have written a few others, and you've got a real interest, I see, in I've noticed, in World War II sort of stuff. And so is that your big interest, or?
Well, kind of. I'd say it's East European history is my big interest.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, that was ignited. I went on a student exchange when I was nearly 14 in 1981, and that's obviously proper communist Soviet Russia. and I was on student exchange in Leningrad, and that really sparked an interest. And then my dad was in Berlin, and he was in British Army of the Rhine as well. So that sparked an interest in post Second World War Germany and the divide. So I've always been really interested in the Cold War. So Checkpoint Charlie it's an oral history. So that took me nearly 3 years of research and writing, and I went everywhere, and I interviewed nearly 80 people, American, British, French, East and West Germans, Soviets, military, police, civilians, politicians, media. And it was all about trying to give the reader a 360-degree view of what was it like living in Berlin through the life of the war, 28 years of the Berlin Wall. Mm-hmm. So, and I hope I captured that. I mean, I had some really lovely things said about it, and I've done lots of talks in lockdown like this to lots of different groups, whether it's colleges, schools, lots of veteran groups, especially in the States. I've done quite a few veterans groups. Berlin Brigade, if anyone's watching from the Berlin Brigade in America, did 2 or 3 talks with those guys. They helped me a lot with that book. And then my new book is called The Lighthouse of Stalingrad, and I was very lucky because I managed to get out to Russia a year and a half ago in lockdown, and I went to Moscow, and then I went down to, because obviously Stalingrad is now Volgograd.
Yeah.
It's about 1,000 kilometers south of Moscow. So I went to Volgograd for a week and just sat in the museum archives. And I was very, very lucky, actually, because obviously you're not going to be doing it now for the foreseeable future.
No.
But I basically read about nearly 200 testimonies of Soviet soldiers who fought at Stalingrad that survived, that had written down their memories. And no one's ever seen them from the Western perspective anyway. And I had nearly 180,000 words of translated text of testimonies. So the lighthouse refers to one house. You can see it in the distance on that cover, and it's very, very famous in Russia. It's like the Alamo is to the Americans. It's called Pavlov's house, and that's a house that the legend has it, small unit of Soviet guardsmen, stormtroopers, took or won back from the Germans in the heart of the city when you had all that brutal house-to-house fighting going on. And they recaptured it. It's a 4-story building, and then they turned it into a mini fortress. And there was about 28 guardsmen, and then they held out against 2 or 3 regiments of Germans for 58 days, and they killed loads. And at the end of the battle, the Russian general who's in charge of the army and defending the city said that there were more Germans killed trying to take that house than there were Germans killed taking Paris. Now, that's all great, and that's the kind of story I was hoping to tell. But when I went to the archives and I'm reading all this stuff, I realized, and you'll have to buy the book to find out, I realized that there's a lot of myth and Soviet propaganda involved in that story, like there was in lots of these heroic stories you read about Stalingrad. And they were told for the right reasons, to keep the morale of the army and the country going when they thought they were going to lose the battle to the Germans. So there's a lot of that going on. So I'm telling the story of what actually happened. And the lighthouse is the code name for the building. That was the name, the code name the Russians gave the building was the lighthouse. So it's really interesting. I finished it. It's getting right now.
Really, really interesting. I actually really find that part of the World War II very interesting myself. The eastern side,
Yeah, because I mean it's
it is interesting.
It's unsung, really. I mean, I know Anthony Beevor wrote the best book on Stalingrad, and he was the first one into the archives once the Cold War finished, and now they're all closed. I mean, that was one of the reasons why I went down to Volgograd, because I thought, I know there's material in their archives I can read, and they invited me down. Whereas if you try and go to the military archives where Anthony went, which is outside Moscow, is a place called Podolsk, that's all shut up now. You're just not going to get in, and you won't get in now. Now, obviously, everything's happening in Ukraine. So I was very, very, very fortunate to get there and spend a week there. And it's a shame because I'd love to go back, but like I said, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
No, and again, that's the Germans. Hitler's biggest mistake, really, wasn't it? Stalingrad.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say another thing is I put lots of adverts out in German newspapers for families of, because everyone's died now,
Yeah,
but for families of veterans who survived and came home. Would they have any letters or correspondence from them? I'd be really interested to have them. And I got about 30 responses, and one of them was just, completely mind-blowing, because it was basically a big briefcase of just the correspondence, diaries, sketches, memories of a senior German officer whose regiment had done most of the fighting. So all that fighting we hear about, room to room, floor by floor in the heart of the city, it was his regiment that had done the bulk of it at the beginning. And then they'd survived through the battle. And then once the Germans were surrounded, once the Russians had surrounded them, it was his perimeter, his small perimeter still in the city that the senior command with Paulus, General Paulus, went to. So those pieces of film we all see that are famous of Paulus surrendering to the Russians. This officer, his name's Colonel Roska, it was his command. He was in charge. And no one's ever heard his story because basically he served 12 years in a Russian prisoner of war camp in Siberia and elsewhere, was one of the last guys to come back in about 1955, wrote a mini memoir, got all his papers together, got all the letters he'd sent his wife home from Stalingrad during the fighting. And he was an ex-architect as well, so he'd done lots of sketches, put them all in the briefcase and then committed suicide. And basically his family have had this briefcase and no one's touched it since. And his youngest son, because all the others have died now, his youngest son, who's 79, said, I would love you to have it because his story needs to be told. And it's just epic, absolutely epic.
Wow, so, it's amazing how these opportunities just come up.
No, honestly, I was privileged to read it, actually. And I don't mean that from a pro-German point of view. I just mean from a historical point of view.
Yeah. Really, and again, historians, this is the thing we get, it's like when you like the Civil War, people go, oh, do you like, who do you like the best? And I'm like, I like both sides of the story because I'm a historian, and that's what we're about, But Stalingrad is just horrendous, for those.
Well, it's the biggest
guys. It's the more I've delved into it, it's quite sickening, really. It's
over 1 million
regardless of if they were German or not, they were human beings at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that's what I try and capture in the book from both sides is because as we all know, it's always like with these poor saps that are surrendering to the Ukrainians at the moment. It's always the poor old soldier at the front line who's following the orders from above who ends up in impossible situations. And that's what I try and capture in the book. Yeah,
that sounds great, mate. And so we'll go back to the Civil War book now, because obviously, so all the listeners and people that have watched this video will get 15% off by entering the discount code Civil War 15 at the checkout. Offer is valid from the 3rd of March until the 3rd of May 2022. I'll put the link in the description below. Iain, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And so thanks a lot.
Cheers.